Last week, a super cyclone devastated Kolkata and our hearts are broken. We are still desperately trying to get information and an update on what is happening. Many people are still without power and internet, so information is slow. We have been working with the street and slum communities since 1999, the most affected people during what has become crisis after crisis these past few months. This is the worst cyclone to form in the Bay of Bengal since the 1990s. Official reports so far indicate that 86 people have been killed in West Bengal, but that figure is still rising. I find it hard to put into words how we feel today, how the Hope family feel for our colleagues, dear friends and children in our care who are suffering. Their lives were already hard enough. COVID-19 hit them. Today marks day 68 of no wages or of food for thousands there, and then a devastating cyclone. It is easy to feel helpless and hopeless, but we will gather our strength and go on. We vow to keep working on our recovery plan for them. Thank you for your help feeding all the families. These past few months, it has saved thousands of people. We will keep feeding them. If you can afford to help again, please do so. Thank you.
Hello, namaste, and assalamu alaikum to everyone. Hope that you've all had a great weekend wherever you are and that you're all safe and well. Eid Mubarak to those who recently celebrated the end of Ramadan. My name is Reza Beyad. I'm an ambassador for the Hope Foundation. It's my great pleasure to be your host this evening. The reason why we are here today is to try and raise awareness about and to bring hope to some of the most underprivileged and marginalized children and communities in Kolkata. I would like to welcome to this conversation three hugely talented, inspirational, and distinguished individuals. And over the next 60 minutes, we will talk about Hope, the concept, Hope's frontline work and challenges, and especially with regards to COVID-19. And of course, now with the devastating cyclone that has hit in the past week. We'd like to try and find out how our three guests have coped with previous crises in their lives, and if there are any parallels with COVID-19 challenges, the challenges of lockdown and personal anecdotes. We'd love to hear some funny ones as well, sort of bring some lighthearted content to the conversation. But before I do that, let me give you a short, brief background to Hope. Since 1999, Hope has worked tirelessly, as many of you know, especially Andrea, you've been there, to support street-connected children and slum communities in Kolkata. And today, with the help of some very generous benefactors, Hope implements over 60 programs supporting almost 3 million beneficiaries in a range of sectors, including child protection, education, healthcare, vocational training. Hope's got a national staff of over 500 people working in India, and it offers a really dynamic and forceful response to these communities, which are sustainable and have positive changes in their lives. And Hope's vision really is of a world where it should never hurt to be a child. And so hopefully during the course of this conversation, we'll be repeating that mantra over and over again. Hope initiated an emergency response COVID-19 program on the 23rd of March, and it's been able to feed over 40,000 people facing starvation during this crisis. And now, within 60 days, they are now having to initiate yet another emergency response program to deal with this cyclone that has devastated the area. Today, Hope is responding to this cyclone in many ways by distributing emergency food supplies, clean water, urgently needed shelter around Kolkata, around the Sundarbans and Howrah district. Bhasha, you and Shashi, you will be familiar with those areas. So really, in a sense, scope is now responding to three disasters. One is their ongoing and long-standing strategy of the last 21 years. One is in response to COVID-19, and now, of course, the cyclone. I will shortly ask my colleague and friend Geeta Venkadakrishnan, Director of Hope in Kolkata, to give us a report from the fields in Calcutta. For those of you who don't know Geeta, she's a beautiful humanitarian, and anyone who's passed through Calcutta knows and loves her. She often quotes Mahatma Gandhi saying that we must be the change we wish to see in the world, and she definitely follows that dictum.
The COVID-19 pandemic has left very badly to the street, slum and homeless population in Calcutta, where hope works. We have seen people in the street and slums standing in a queue for drinking water, for toilet, because every 25 families have one toilet, and it's so difficult that to stand for again another line for the ration when most of them do not have also a ration card. And in the ration you are getting only rice. So Hope is supporting with rice, wheat, pulses, spices and potatoes from March 23rd till date. It is very difficult to see of them, especially the children who are only having 1 square meal a day. Their hairs are growing into brown, reddish because of malnourishment. These children are just moving around with no social distancing because the family's 8 members are there in a plastic sheet. It is so difficult to maintain a social distancing. And with this COVID pandemic, because mostly are daily laborers, migrant workers, as well as incense stick sellers, rickshaw pullers, tea sellers and maid servants, where they will go. They are mostly come from the village to the city to work as a maid servant. Because of the lockdown, they could not go back because the train is not plying. A big challenge. So they live on the street and slum and the street connected corners of the slums. With all these COVID-19, we had another attack of sea, that is Cyclone Amphan, on March 20th, 2020. And this has literally uprooted 5,000 trees, 2,500 electric poles, 900 villages in water. The Calcutta city, which is a city of joy, has really turned into a city of sorrow, because nearly 84 people died. Out of that, 19 died of electric shock, and because of these electric poles being uprooted. And also people's houses, plastic sheets in the street slums have just flown. There are lots of birds, dogs. Even in the Alipur Zoo, the animals are traumatized and been killed, and trees have been uprooted. It has not only affected the human being but also the animals and birds. It will take really a good time to revamp the city and to make it a joy. But for this, we all have to come forward and support one another and make their life normal. It is in our hands, your hands, everybody's hands, to make this world a better place. By saying this, it doesn't get over. I had not been having electricity for 4 days and no water because of this cyclone Amphan. I was complaining, but when I came on the street, I saw that still 7th day it is no electricity has been restored, no internet, no water. What am I complaining? In the villages for 3 months there will be no electricity, no water. their life is shattered. Because to restore back, it will take a long time. And they are not having the drinking water. They need tarpaulin immediately because the cyclone is coming on Friday, this Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And then we will have rainy season next month. So it is becoming very disastrous. We are attacked with 2 C's, coronavirus and cyclone Amphan. And we now need to get back to our normalcy of life. Till now, we have nearly provided around 30,000 families, and we are still many more to reach, because there is nearly about 3 lakh population whose life has been not normal because the village people has badly affected. So I would request Hope to come and support Hope, so that one person, if supports another person, I think the life will be back to normalcy. We all should support one another person to make their life normal. You know, what we are giving out, we sometimes give out on many things, but I think this is the time to show those who have not even yet donated to donate. Please come and support Hope.
Thank you, Geeta. Thank you for taking the time from your hectic schedule to share your thoughts and information with us this evening. You are obviously having to cope with one crisis after another. What you have said has been truly devastating. The pain, the anguish, the suffering that these people have to endure is beyond our imagination. So, you know, the look of hopelessness and fear etched on their faces is something that all of us feel quite troubled with. This is truly painful, and we definitely will give you our word that we will try our best to raise as much money as we can to support you and the Hope Foundation. Moving on, thank you, Geeta, once again, and moving on with our conversation. So we are now joined by 3 distinguished individuals, and what I'd like to do is to introduce each one of them. We have Andrea Catherwood, an award-winning news broadcaster and journalist with over 25 years of experience as a national TV and radio presenter. She is currently a BBC Radio 4 presenter. Am I right, Andrea?
Absolutely,
yeah,
yes. That's what I've been doing this morning.
Yeah, and exactly, and a documentary maker. Andrea is an ambassador for Hope and has visited the center in Kolkata. We then have Bhasha Mukherjee. Bhasha, we would like to say hello to our viewers. And Bhasha, if you just say hello, then maybe I will get your face up on the screen as it's showing the speaker's
Hello.
view. Yeah.
Hello.
Now you're. That's lovely. Okay. So Bhasha is for those of you who don't know, and I hope there aren't many out there who don't know, she's current Miss England. Bhasha is born in Kolkata, is a frontline NHS doctor in Lincolnshire, to the north of London, and is an ambassador for Hope. And finally, I'm privileged to have my dear old friend Shashi Tharoor, and I don't think I need to introduce him to his 7.5 million followers. Shashi is a 3rd-time Member of Parliament for Thiruvananthapuram, and I think I pronounced that correctly.
You did. I'm impressed.
Is the best-selling author of 20 books, both fiction and non-fiction, besides being a former Under-Secretary General of the UN. Shashi has held several ministerial posts in the current government of India, sorry, not current, but in the government of India, and has had won several awards. He currently chairs Parliament's Standing Committee on Information Technology. So let's try and begin with starting our conversation with maybe saying something about Andrea. Andrea, you've been at the forefront of reporting from all kinds of dangerous conflict zones. I think you were one of the first journalists to report from New York in the aftermath of 9/11, if I'm not mistaken. and then you reported from Afghanistan, where you witnessed the fall of the Taliban, and I think you also had an injury there. Am I right?
I did. I was actually really fortunate because I was injured by shrapnel, but it was a very minor injury in my legs, and in fact, the police chief that I was only a few meters away from lost his life. So it was a suicide attack by some Taliban who had been arrested and sort of imprisoned, but we thought they had also been searched, but they hadn't. But yeah, I suppose what it's given me, having done so much frontline reporting, perhaps when this particular crisis, this pandemic arrived in the UK, there were very few people who had very many reference points to have their lives turned upside down. You know, people in the UK have been so fortunate in the past few generations. You know, they haven't, in a large part, been exposed to major illnesses or to natural disasters or to a war. And so I suppose in the early days here in the UK, for the very first time in my memory in this country, and I live in London, it began to feel a little bit like some of the places that I'd reported from, where people just realized that their daily life, the things that they hold dear, you know, being able to see friends, feeling secure, knowing that the shops are full of food, allowing their children to go and play and go to school, the really basic things in life were being disrupted. And actually, that is something that around the world, a lot of people have had to live with. Here in the West, we haven't. And it's been very interesting watching people in this country come to terms with something that people across the world have had to deal with in the last few decades.
Yeah, I'll just get some comments from Shashi and Bhasha, but you know, going back all those many years when you were reporting from Baghdad, there's one particular scene which kind of is embedded in my mind, and I'm pretty sure it's embedded in your mind as well once I mention it. And that's with you sitting in a hospital bed with that young boy, Ali Abbas, who had lost both his arms. And what I remember of that scene is you sitting there, and to me, you had almost, in a nice way, in a positive way, compromised your journalistic neutrality, because you were sitting there more as a mother than as a journalist, and you were actually rubbing your fingers through this little boy's hair as you were speaking to him. And you know, I could see total disbelief and a maternal sympathy in your eyes. What memory do you have of that scene, and does it still haunt you?
Well, Reza, it's really interesting that you have brought up that particular case, because I think that was the time that I came closest, and you're right, to really not being able to do my job as an impartial reporter. I wasn't even sure that those pictures should go on air. We'd been told that in this particular hospital that we'd been to before, I mean, it was a horrific scene. It was in the very worst of the time in Baghdad. There was an awful lot of looting. There were dead bodies in the forecourt of the hospital piling up. There were people who had been blown up. They were looters who'd blown up a garage with petrol because they were smoking cigarettes while they were looting the gasoline. And they were, I can't even describe their injuries. It was horrific. And we were sort of shown into a sort of side room to find this child. And he had a cage over his body, a metal cage. And on it were some really fairly dirty old rugs to cover him. And he'd lost his arms, his entire body was burned, where he had been wearing a t-shirt, a football shirt, when a US bomb had exploded. It had killed his entire family except for him. He was sitting on his mum's knee. His mum was expecting a baby. And he'd lost everybody. I mean, and he was so nearly dead. And I sort of felt that we shouldn't, was it our job to show this really horrendously ill child he was not capable really of giving consent for these photographs to be taken of him, because he was a 10-year-old boy. And yet I was so angry, and we turned off the the camera, and I talked to him for a while through a translator, and I mentioned football because he'd been wearing a football top, and he said, he mentioned a Portuguese footballer, and then I said, do you know David Beckham? And this was at the height of David Beckham's fame, and he said David Beckham in English. And I thought, if I get this kid on TV saying David Beckham, he might just get saved. And because this is going to really resonate in the UK. It was the Easter weekend, it was the Easter holiday, and it went out, the initial report went out on Easter Sunday. Huge viewing figures, people are at home in the evenings watching TV. And so I think I did that partly because I wanted to save him. And not that I saved him, but that report going out put in train the US. It put a lot of pressure on Americans to come, and eventually they did come and take him, airlift him out to Kuwait. And I mean, I'm still in touch with them today. It was, you talk about being maternal. I didn't have any kids then, but I had a baby the next year. He came to London where he underwent surgery, a huge amount of reconstructive surgery. Right. And
not too far from where I live. I think that was at the Roehampton Hospital.
Yeah, and I remember bringing my relatively newborn baby to see him, and I remember him playing with Finn, and we've stayed in touch ever since. He's back in Baghdad now. But yeah, I think that did compromise me journalistically because I was so angry. I was so angry to see this child and his horrific story. And he was collateral damage. And in fact, I think the line I used in that was, "This is the face of collateral damage." This was the child, just one example of what happens in war.
Yeah, you talk about journalistic neutrality. Frank Gardner, your colleague, is a good friend. And in fact, initially when you were saying that was a moment for you when you had the shrapnel wound, regrettably with Frank, as you know, it was far more serious.
Much more serious.
And same people. And we often have this discussion with him about the journalistic neutrality. But I've also been discussing with him a lot about how he's coping, exactly what you said, with his background, with the current situation. Let's move on to Bhasha. And I'm only doing this sort of alphabetically, Shashi. I'm not keeping you for the last.
No, ladies first. No. I'm very happy to have you do that.
Bhasha is Kolkata born, speaks 5 languages fluently. That's almost 5 more than I can speak. Has an IQ of 146, which is, quadruple of what my IQ is, perhaps. And that, I think, officially makes her into a genius. She's had earned 2 degrees, one in medical science and the other in medicine and surgery. And then to top it all, she became Miss England, and all at the age of 23. And today she's taking a break from her frontline duties as an NHS doctor in Lincolnshire to be with us today and in supporting hope. Bhasha, you've also had your battles. You fought them with courage, and you've used the difficulties that you've been through to make you the person that you are. Do you think, similar to some of the issues that Andrea suggested, that the struggle that you went through helped you achieve the success that you have today, and for you to have a better appreciation of what you have? And do you think we as human beings, we only appreciate things when we have to work hard and struggle to get it, rather than have it thrown on us? And then, moving on, whilst we get in the discussion, obviously, we'd love you to give us a brief insight of what it feels like to being at the front line in this fight against COVID-19. I know you've had a huge, and still have a huge, interest in mental health. It's Mental Health Week this week. So if you can, during the conversation, even give us some insight in there. And for the listeners, you may not know, but I think about it was 20 years ago or so, Shashi, you were asked to be a judge for Miss India, and you refused to do that whilst you were at the UN. Why would you do that, my friend?
Well, I think, first of all, I mean, it wasn't terribly convenient, the timing of it. I was leaving India a week before the contest. But secondly, and perhaps more important, I wasn't terribly keen on the idea of a man judging female beauty. I think that I have nothing against these beauty and personality contests. I think they're great. They bring out tremendous talents and attractiveness in young people. But I would rather that they had women judges for women contestants, because I think that takes the male gaze out of the equation. There's too much objectifying of women already anyway around the world. And I didn't want to be part of that process. But I will say that looking back, it's one of those might have been.
Yeah, Shashi, if your sister were listening to you now, she'll be talking about your unconscious bias.
There you go. Well, my unconscious bias is always in favor of women. So
okay, there we go. Over to you, Bhasha. Do you want to just throw some light on some of those topics?
I must say that without being mean or anything like that, I'm a lot younger and a lot inexperienced than the rest of you in all that I've experienced in my lifetime so far. But one of the things that I did experience is immigration. And I think that was a life-changing event for myself. And I wouldn't like to go ahead and say that the difficulties that are being faced by people all over the world right now is anything like what it was for me immigrating. But maybe I'd like to make an inference of change, and the commonality between these two, I'd say, is change, and a drastic change in your life. And for me, coming from India to this country, for me, and you know about this, Reza, that there were certain financial struggles and different things, whether it's racism, financial struggles, etc. But I always saw that as a need to evolve, as a reason to evolve, and I see this as an opportunity to evolve as well. Whenever we are faced with adversities like this, it really does test us, and it does, cause us to evolve at a very, very fast rate. And I'm sure, at the end of this, we'll see that maybe humanity has evolved at a very fast pace because of all this. Even if we don't physically evolve in terms of our physical characteristics, it could even be as little as government policies, healthcare policies that are in place. Sure. And we already saw a massive change in what the government was willing to do to help the NHS, which I work for here, and across the world, and how they wanted to support people, and how that suddenly there was enough funds to allow for that, and that made me think that surely we were not using our funds correctly in the right place, and maybe this is an opportunity for us to move in the right direction, and perhaps we are. So that's what I'd like to say, that whenever you're going through a massive change, I think it forces us to change ourselves in a positive way and evolve, and that's only good for all of us. So I don't know if that's
yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's a time for reflection, and it's a challenging time for all of us in many respects, and we'll perhaps come to that a little later. Let's bring Shashi in. Shashi has, as many of all of you know, is a prolific writer since a very early age. I think he probably started writing even before he started speaking. Shashi, you worked for the UN for 29 years, and during this time you also worked for the UNHCR. And if I'm correct, you were in Singapore during the boat people crisis. You also worked with the UN peacekeeping operations in former Yugoslavia. So you've dealt with, Bhasha spoke about the migrants. You've dealt with that. You have dealt with peacekeeping in Yugoslavia, where there was a lot of death and destruction. How does COVID-19 compare with what you've dealt with in the past in terms of giving you the emotional tools to deal with some of the things that you're dealing with today?
Well, Reza, let me say that as Bhasha sweetly reminded us that some of us, translation you and me, are a lot older and have gone through a lot more perhaps than some of the younger participants. I really have had a lot of experiences which would be relevant to the broader concerns you have today in this discussion. Let me take a couple of different examples before I answer the question. One was, for example, the first you mentioned when I was working in Singapore, heading the small office of the UN High Commissioner for Refugees at the peak of the Vietnamese boat people crisis. And we had these Vietnamese fleeing communism in small boats and coming out and often ending up being rescued by ships coming on their way into the port of Singapore. And that's when my office swung into action, got them off the ships, looked after them in refugee camps and so on. And I had many, many interesting cases. One story that has stayed in my mind all these decades since I was there was that of a young Vietnamese family that left in a tiny boat with a cannibalized tractor engine, which promptly conked out. So they started drifting aimlessly on the South China Seas. Soon enough, they ran out of food, they ran out of drinking water, and they were essentially subsisting on rainwater and hope. Now that's fine for the parents up to a point, but it wasn't going to be okay for the two infants. They had a 1.5-year-old child and a baby. So what do the parents do? They slit their own fingers and made the baby suck their blood to get enough nutrients to stay alive. And when they were rescued, as it happens in an American ship, they were so weak they couldn't actually even sit up in their little boat. The Americans had to come down with grappling hooks and ropes and so on, pick them up and take them into the ship. And when they reached the port, my staff and I broke every rule in the book to rush them off to intensive care in one of the hospitals in Singapore. And to see that same family a few months later, alive, healthy, well-dressed, and setting off for new lives in the US, offered the kind of satisfaction that few other jobs could. So that sort of incident, and I had many, many, many other episodes and other stories I could tell, helped me to put my head to the pillow at night, every night, knowing that things I had done during the day, interventions I had made, immigration officers I've been able to persuade, government officials I've been able to turn decisions around with, and so on, had actually made a difference to human beings' lives. And these were real human beings I could see and meet every day. So that as an early, I mean, I was 25 years old when all this was happening. I thought that this was a tremendous opportunity for me to learn a valuable lesson in life, that crises and tragedies will always occur. But if you can make a difference, and it doesn't matter, you may not be able to solve the problem, but you can change the life of one family, one person, one small group, whatever it may be, then it's all worthwhile. That's the best any of us can do. And I carry that attitude with me throughout my UN career. I was the person handling the civil war in the former Yugoslavia as the team leader in the Department of Peacekeeping under Kofi Annan. And clearly, we were working 18-hour days and the blood was still flowing. There was still fighting going on. But at the same time, the effort was worthwhile because there were individual differences we were able to make. Sometimes we fail. And in an ongoing war, peacekeeping was never designed to be applied to a place where there was no peace to keep. But still, that constant making of an effort was warranted because of the hope that we could perhaps bring to these people. Then I came into Indian politics after 29 years of that sort of thing. And of course, in some ways, the problems of our country, the huge development challenges, are intractable. No one is going to wave a magic wand, not even Mr. Narendra Modi, despite his delusions, and change the country overnight. But each of us can do something in small ways for people. And I mark my decade in politics with a series of little successes in which I've been able to help people in ways that have helped them in their lives. Now, COVID has obviously given me lots of opportunities to do that, both on the larger scale, that is trying to get some rules changed so that funds at my disposal could be applied to relief measures, personal protective equipment, testing equipment, and so on, which I was able to do. Secondly, trying to use my position, my influence, my contacts with ministers in the government to get things done for people. One story that probably resonate with someone like Bhasha is that just a few days ago, well, a couple of weeks ago now, a mother contacted me in desperation. She had a child suffering from a rare form of cancer for which the only likelihood of treatment was in a rare experimental treatment in the Netherlands. But the child's blood had to be tested for a particular genetic condition that these people could treat. And for that, the blood had to reach the Netherlands. But with all flights banned and the lockdown in full force, they were not able to do anything about that. And the worst thing was that the treatment had to be started before the child turned 2, which is happening in the middle of June. So having tried every other method, they reached out to me. I wasn't even their MP. They were originally from my constituency, but were living somewhere else. But I decided I would see what I could do. And I managed to speak to both the foreign minister and the Minister of Civil Aviation. Said, this is one place where you can make a difference to one individual human being. I don't know them, you don't know them, but we look what we can do. And they both were as good as they were. They swung into action. We got the blood samples picked up from the hospital. One set of people transported it to the nearest city to the south, which I think in that case was Bangalore, flew it to Mumbai, managed to catch a plane that was evacuating German nationals to Europe, put it on that plane out to Germany, whereupon it was then taken by the Indian embassy officials to the genetic lab in the Netherlands. I still don't know if that child's going to make it, but at least we know that it won't be because we couldn't try to give her that one break in life. So these are the sorts of stories one can tell, Reza. There's a lot of this happening. And I think, the country is full of people doing all this. Migrant labor has been suffering terribly. And yet human beings have brought out the best in them. I mean, I was told by somebody who drove on a stretch where there were a lot of migrant laborers walking, that there wasn't a single kilometer where there weren't some people from that area showing up with free cooked food and water to help these people. And that kind of thing is what gives you hope for humanity. And that's the kind of thing you're doing with your Operation Hope in Calcutta. And that's why I'm here with you to try and support your efforts.
Thank you, Shashi, for sharing that. In fact, I knew about that story of this little child, and I was hoping that you would share it with us. Andrea, just to show that when it comes to journalistic neutrality, I once challenged one of Shashi's very close friend, unfortunately, who regrettably also died as a result of terrorism in Baghdad. I once challenged him on the neutrality of the UN, and it's a very poignant exchanges of emails that we had between the two of us, where I initially started challenging him, and then we became very close friends. I'd never met him, but there was something about it that connected the two of us. And then a few days later, I find out that he was blown into pieces. So I think when it comes to neutrality, and Shashi, you kind of touched on it, that occasionally you need to break the rules. And I think there was I forget who it was, Senator Wellstone, I think, who said, I used to help in soup kitchens, and everyone thought that, I was such a great man. And as soon as I started asking the question, why do we have soup kitchens? People thought I was a radical, I was a socialist. But I think occasionally we need to do that. We need to challenge why things have been the way they have been, even if they've been for a long time, because unless we do that, then nothing changes in the way we deal with things. And in terms of how humanity is dealing, it almost brings tears to my eyes when I see Muslims cremating Hindus, and Hindus bringing iftar to Muslims, and churches opening up to Muslims to pray. I mean, this is unbelievable, where people are literally transcending all kinds of boundaries and reaching out to each other. Shashi, you're a very proud Keralite, I know, and in one of your books, you kind of describe an encounter you had with the son of a very famous film star in those days, who asked you which caste you belong to. And when you said you didn't know, he was sort of curious as to how you didn't know the caste.
I was
that you
11 years old, and my
I know.
parents were not big fans of the caste system or of
Sure.
people being conscious of caste and religion and all of that stuff. And so they never bothered to enlighten the kids. And then this happened. But, and I look back on it, I had a different episode which you don't know about later in life. In that particular instance, yeah. So the guy said, you mean you're not a Brahmin or something? And I didn't even tell him I was a something. So I went back home and talked to my parents and finally got my sort of awareness. But one interesting thing was I had written about an article about caste, that I was brought up to be oblivious of caste, that I never asked people's caste. I was unaware of their caste. I hired people, whether on my professional teams or in my home, in my kitchen, without ever inquiring about or caring about their caste. All I was interested in was their competence and their willingness to work. And when I did that, I got a massive pushback from a bright and rather feisty young Dalit blogger. The Dalits are the community that used to be called in the British days untouchables. And this lady wrote rightly saying that, don't you realize that obliviousness to caste is actually a luxury of the privileged? No Dalit can afford to be oblivious to their caste. And that kind of shook me up a bit because, one doesn't necessarily think of that. We don't forget that it's not like the US or something where if somebody is visibly black, they're black and they suffer some of the disabilities that come from that, whoever they might be. Whereas in caste, you can't tell somebody's caste by looking at them. You really have to judge either by their name, where they live in the village, or how what you can find out about them.
Or what their profession is.
And sometimes indeed by what their profession is. So that's breaking down in the urban areas where, particularly thanks to affirmative action, that's no longer a good guide. There are lots of Brahmin clerks taking orders from Dalit executives and learning to lump it. But what happens is they will not necessarily seat that Dalit boss at their dining table. That's the kind of unfortunate prejudice and social ostracism we still see. But the truth is that because it's not visible, I thought it should be possible to eradicate. That was certainly the view of Nehru, our first prime minister, who actually believed and thought that caste would simply disappear. But ironically, our democracy served to undermine the social reform, because in democracy, caste became a very useful instrument of political mobilization. As people tried to mobilize caste support, putting up candidates of a particular caste, appealing to the interests of a particular caste, depending on the caste balance in a particular constituency, and so on. And as a result, caste consciousness has actually grown in India in the course of the last 70 years. And we had a very old affirmative action program going back to the days of our constitution, which reserved not just opportunities, but outcomes for the Dalits. But about 30 years ago, that was expanded to also include other backward classes and castes. And those people then developed a further consciousness of it. So now it's impossible to even apply for a government job without indicating what caste you are, because more than half the applicants would actually have opportunities reserved for them because of the caste to which they belong. As a forward caste person said to me rather bitterly, these days in India, you can't go forward unless you're a backward. Now, this kind of talk may not be welcome, but it does at least underscore the message that caste consciousness is greater than it's ever been, rather than merely disappearing from the scene.
You've always been a vocal advocate of your fundamental commitment to supporting the marginalized people in India. And in one of your books, you've actually also written about how the fundamental commitment should be to the bottom 25% of the society, which kind of, says exactly what you've just mentioned to us. Let's move on and bring everyone in here. So how have all of you dealt with the lockdown? Shashi, I know as an asthmatic, you were not very good at sports in school. You always came first in every other subject but sports. You're a great cricket fan, but how do you keep fit these days, especially when you probably cannot even go out for walks?
I'm doing 90 minutes of exercise, Reza. You won't believe it. You'll be astonished to see me with my shirt off, but I'm not going to do that for your viewers today. I'm actually hitting the gym. I'm doing not just the treadmill, but lots of weights, isometrics, and even boxing with one of my domestic staff. So
Oh dear.
what I'm essentially doing now is
Bhasha does
seizing
that.
an opportunity that I would simply never have otherwise to just restore a level of fitness that I may find difficult to sustain.
Yeah.
But there's no excuse not to right now, so I'm doing that.
How about you, Bhasha? How have you been dealing with the lockdown? You go into work every day, so your experience is slightly different.
I mean, it's been hard because we've had to do a lot of really long shifts. I've just finished my 13-hour night shift, my second night shift today. I've got another one tonight, and there's a lot of walking around in the hospital. But I'm trying to walk to work, which is a 40-minute walk and back. Just to keep my muscles strong enough, because what's happened is because of this lockdown, my diet and everything's just fallen to pieces. And to be honest, like being on your feet at the hospital, it doesn't strengthen your muscles. It tires you out. It makes your feet ache, but it doesn't strengthen your muscles. So I'm trying to do that. And yes, as Shashi said about boxing, when I do see my family, we try to do some boxing and kickboxing. I really miss that about my daily routine before lockdown, actually. So that's all I'm doing at the moment.
Andrea, how have you been keeping yourself? You've been
Shashi,
working from home, right?
Yeah, I've been going in actually the last few days. I've been broadcasting back from London because I did set up a studio at home, and that has been working quite successfully. But interestingly, we had some quite big programs, quite complicated programs with a lot of different guests. So the last few days I've gone into London, and it's quite a strange thing to do because just driving along roads that, as you know, are normally absolutely jammed with cars, and there's hardly anybody on them.
Right.
Parking right in the centre, driving along Regent Street. Again, normally, of course, one of the most famous streets in London, full of shops, full of people, full of tourists. And of course, it's completely empty. There's a couple of pigeons and me, So it's been very strange. But in terms of keeping fit, you were talking, Shashi, about cricket, and I've got 3 cricket mad sons, absolutely cricket obsessed.
You have a large lawn, Andrea.
and our lawn is paying the price, I have to say, because it's basically been turned into a cricket net. So we've put up some netting. The boys are just playing there all the time. It's fantastic for them because they get to kind of be outside. They're 3 brothers. I've got identical twins and another boy who's 18 months older. So one is a batsman, wicket keeper, and the other 2 are bowlers. And so there's plenty going on. They can play with each other. So because our lockdown means you can't see friends, at least they've still been able to do that. So I used to be, when they were younger, I used to be asked to join in. But these days, I'm afraid, my skills are judged to be just too poor to make the game any good at all. So
they'd ask you to be a ball girl, Andrea.
No, well,
pick up the ball when they whack it.
I think tea maker is what they would really like me to do.
Yes.
Well, that's an indispensable part of all amateur cricket.
Yes.
I used to play cricket in places like Geneva and Singapore in my UN career, playing on Sundays. And in Geneva, for a couple of years, I turned out for the team of the Centre Européen de la Recherche Nucléaire, simply because they were a wonderful bunch of guys, and their spouses made the best teas. So one went looking forward above all to the tea.
To the tea.
Well, yeah. I have to say, when we're playing, when the boys are playing sort of Sunday matches here over the summer, not when they're not playing for their school, they always love it. We live in an area where there are a lot of teams that are predominantly Bangladeshi or Pakistani or Indian, and of course they love those because they get really, really good teas, because they get people who bring them fantastic Indian food. And I think that that goes down a lot better than, say, cheese sandwiches that might come from
Well, probably, yes.
some of the English mothers are a little bit duller, you know.
Yeah.
Well, you know, there's something to be said, though, particularly, I mean, you know, the CERN team, the Centre Européen de la Recherche Nucléaire, used to play just across the border in France, actually, in a place called Cleverssin. And in that sort of climate, I must say that there is something to be said for, you know, hot buttered scones with homemade jam and cheese sandwiches, delicately cut. I'm beginning to salivate at the memory.
Yes.
Mind you, I mean, obviously the cricket itself was a lot of fun because the grounds are small and manageable, and everybody was of a certain level of mutual incompetence, which made the competition a little more bearable. But anyway, I envy your sons. Mine are, alas, not only older, but they're not with me. They're both in America. So I don't have anyone even to bowl at or bat to.
You mean Smitha's not helping you out, Shashi?
Smitha, I'm afraid, is a handicap on a sports field. So she has wonderful qualities and merits, and she is a fitness fanatic. She's the one who nags me into going out to the gym and doing my bits. But no, I wouldn't. Actually, we do have when, you know, because of my position as MP, there's a rotating team of security people who come in one day after the other, and the couple of domestic staff I have at home have children as well. So we can actually assemble a ragtag bunch of people on the lawn. About once a week we manage to get around doing that. But it's also very hot in India these days.
It is, yes.
So sustaining a couple of hours in the heat is not actually, in this weather, terribly realistic.
When my boys went out to Kolkata, and that's actually what they were doing with the kids in the Hope Foundation homes. They were playing cricket with them, and it's such a fantastic way to bond because you know, they couldn't speak to them, they couldn't communicate in each other's languages. Although some of the kids could speak a little English, my kids could not speak any Bangla, so they, you know, we had a problem there, but they could play cricket together, and that was incredibly bonding. And you know, everybody, they all know what they're doing when they get onto a cricket field, or you know, at times this was just literally the road outside one of the homes, and you know, a rickshaw would come up and everyone would move out of the way, and then they all move back, they'd all get into positions, and off they would go, and they had a fantastic time. And it was a brilliant way for them, you know, they coached the younger ones, they played with the older ones, the boys, the girls played together. It was phenomenal, and it was, I know the kids really enjoyed it. I think my kids got at least as much out of it as the kids in the Hope homes, and it really made, I think, us all realize just how easy it is to bond and how important sport is for that. And some of the kids from the Hope homes then came over to London and took part in something called the Street Children's Cricket World Cup, and they actually got the opportunity to play at Lord's, which so few children, people in the world will ever do. So it was a really, really special time. And that was almost exactly a year ago.
It was, Andrea. It was a year ago. Yeah. Talking about playing cricket with Hope. When my youngest, by the way, Smitha that I'm referring to is Shashi's sister, who lives in London right now under lockdown in Delhi with him. But when my youngest son, who's now 29, he was 9 years old, he was representing his school, and he'd gone to South Africa to play cricket. And I remember the first day that we were going, I was with them as well in the coach. And so the first day they played actually beach cricket. And for those of you who may not know what beach cricket is, so it's cricket, it's played in the beach, it's more like fun. But obviously you played bare feet. You don't wear shoes so that you don't hurt anyone. And I remember going out in the coach and I was explaining to my son and all the other kids in the coach from the school, saying, when we reach there, you know, you'll need to take your shoes off before you start playing. And by the way, the other kids you'll be playing with will not be taking their shoes off. And I said, and that's because they don't wear shoes. You know, they're from a very, very poor background where they can't even afford shoes. So that immediately, you know, first, obviously, 9 and 10-year-olds were shocked and horrified that there are kids around the world who don't have shoes to wear. when you live in a privileged environment, you don't realize what the other half of the world is going through. So that itself was a good way for them to understand and accept that, there are kids in other parts of the world who are less fortunate than they are. With me, the lockdown has been really fun. My 3 grown-up kids at home, Shashi, everyone's here, Abbas, Sahar, Mehdi are here. We have some good fun. Sahar and I do a lot of almost virtual TikToks, not a lot of it. But here's something interesting for you, Shashi. I know you always complain about the weather in this country. We've had sunshine the last 2
Amazing
months.
weather.
Yeah, amazing weather. So now you will need to stop complaining about the weather here. Yeah, Shashi was born in London and he still complains about the weather here.
Well,
Shashi,
I have
how
to
much?
say that I have simply not been lucky with the weather, because whenever I visit London,
Yeah.
it's grey and damp. I mean, I even managed to get expensive and difficult seats for test matches, and came there to watch little boys, pushing paper boats on the boundary line because it was so flooded. I mean, that's been my experience of England. I actually don't believe you know what summer is like at all. I find it
No, trust me, we
It
know.
was 27
and
degrees.
what is more, my
this week.
secret theory of British colonialism is that the reason this lot went out, Andrea's ancestors went out and conquered the rest of us, is because
what
they
he
had to go someplace where the sun shone. That's the
Shashi,
real
I'm
reason.
Irish, so I was actually being
Yes.
conquered.
Oh, you were being conquered
Yes,
and partitioned like the
Andrea's
rest of us.
Irish. Yes, and made to eat potatoes. Yeah, so she's got as much complaint as you and I have, Shashi.
Oh, I love
Yeah.
potatoes, Reza. I
Yeah.
have to say to the others, this hasn't been mentioned so far. Reza was my classmate in Calcutta. His love for Calcutta goes back there. But I have to say that if there was an award for the least likely amongst our batch to turn out to be a serious man of conscience who would help unfortunate children, Reza would have come close to winning that. He was a mischievous young guy. And he's turned out to be a great humanitarian. I want to pay tribute to Reza. And I also want to assure all those parents whose children are incorrigible at 14 and 15 that look at Reza, there's hope for them.
Some hope.
You're giving me hope, Shashi. I've been stuck with them for 9 weeks.
There you are.
They've been great. They've been great. But it does give me a lot of hope that they could turn out like Reza one day.
Shashi, do we have another 10-15 minutes or do you need to rush?
5 or 10 for me, but I'm
okay,
enjoying
5 or
the
10.
conversation.
Okay. Great. Perhaps Bhasha could tell us a little about mental health and almost every day, Bhasha, we are reading about the impact on mental health with this lockdown. Could you give us a insight into what it really means in real life and how people are coping with it?
It is a difficult time for mental health, and as much as it is for people stuck at home, it's equally been difficult for frontliners. I've seen just yesterday night, one of the staff members, it was her son who was in hospital in the same ward she was working in. And there's so many staff members like this who literally take a moment and you see them literally wipe their tears whilst working. And they've got a family member in hospital at the same time. And in a way, work is keeping us at the front line going. And also, in a way, it's numbing us because we're not really getting a chance to face our emotions at the minute. But I think something that I've found really helpful for myself, and that I think people at home would as well, is a gratitude journal, and actually counting your privileges. I've been trying to do this weekly thing about making a list of five highlights of my week, and looking on the positive side in that way has really been helpful for me. It's been difficult because at the front lines, everything is so uncertain at the minute, and that's the worst part of it, that we don't know where this is going to head, how the NHS is going to cope with it. And obviously for us, things are changing at such a rapid rate. It's really it's really difficult to keep up and to cope with it all, and to contain our frustrations in a way. But for me, I've been trying to really try to think mindfully and really break things down. And I really suggest this for anybody else who's watching this as well. It doesn't have to be a grand, big thing that needs to make your day. It really doesn't. For me, a couple of days ago, it was something as simple as, I saw a patient overnight, and they were in so much pain. So much pain. You can see the pain by just looking at the patient. I didn't. She was so frail. She was so frail from the illness that I felt really, it triggered me. It triggered me to go and take, treat her and take bloods from her. And this lady who was so much in pain, and I could visibly see how much pain she was in. She was in so much pain she couldn't even move, and it hurt her that much. It really moved me that even she said to me that, "Oh, if you need any more blood from me, come back again." And I just thought about it, that we might be going through a lot, but when we put things in perspective and think about some people who are suffering so much more than us, and when we see that suffering, and we see them be grateful, how little it makes our suffering seem, and also something like, as Shashi was saying, being able to help someone at a time like now. It's been scientifically proven that when you do an act of kindness, act of selflessness, it activates your dopamine receptors, which is your happy hormone in your brain.
Yeah.
And this is the perfect time to do that. And that's exactly what we're doing, obviously. The whole point of this is to engage people so we can raise money for a good cause. But yes, when you do something to help someone else, it really, and doing something not just as a one-off. As I've seen you, Reza, I've been so inspired by you to see you that you don't, and if you don't mind me saying this, you don't live in a castle, or you don't live this lavish lifestyle. You live such a simple life, but you have the generosity of a king, honestly. And it's so gratifying when we're able to give at our own cost. When we're able to relieve people's pain by going through pain ourselves. I've been feeling very grateful and privileged to be having that position, to actively be in that position at the front lines at the moment. The staff there, I see myself and my colleagues who, I'm sure you've seen the mask, the way the mask leave marks on your face. And, at the end of my shift, I have to say, as Miss England, I don't expect any misses to be having this experience, but my legs ache. I can't get out, I can't walk on them at the end of a night shift because I've been on my feet for that long and stuff. And when at the end of that shift, when a patient says to me, again, I'll give an example. A patient said to me, "Oh my God, I can breathe now," or "Thank you for helping me breathe."
Just a basic thing.
Something so fundamental. It just makes everything worth it, all the struggles. So I'd say that, being able to help someone, if you're in the position to, and even if you're not, in whatever means that you can, to be able to do something, whether it's by raising money for charity or actually helping out, volunteering, anything you can do, I think will really help us cope with the times that we're going through right now.
Thank you very much, Bhasha, and thank you for those comments. Now, for me, my faith kind of underlines and underpins everything that I do. And we are moving through some very, very challenging times. And there's a beautiful quotation from Goethe, who said, "When people keep themselves apart in mutual disdain, truth is hidden from the heart. Their goals are much the same." So I think, during the past few months, we've all realized that, we may have our differences of religion and faith and God knows what else. But fundamentally, we are still all human beings. And I think, it's quite a sobering and humbling experience seeing everyone do, from the NHS to just ordinary people. So, let's try and, see if we can crystallize everything that we've discussed and essentially try and work towards building up a world where it should never hurt to be a child, which is Hope's mantra. To me, when a child is hurt in Kolkata, then every child in India is hurt. And when a child in India is hurt, then every child in the world is hurt. So I think if we can at least try and do our best to protect children, then we've done a part of what we can do. Perhaps I could ask each one of you, beginning with Shashi, and we'll go in reverse order this time, is just to appeal to your followers, Shashi, to make. I know they've all paid up a ticket. They paid up money to see this conversation. But if they can even see if they can make a further donation to the Hope Foundation.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I first of all want to compliment Bhasha on what she said. I think the cliche about someone like her is bound to be beauty with brains, but she's got beauty, brains, and a heart. And I think that's probably the most special and important element in all of that. I wish you all success and stay safe, Bhasha, in your very noble work, looking after patients at this incredibly challenging time. Andrea and I are doing our bit in our own professions. And Reza, as you rightly said, is reaching out as a humanitarian. But just as all of us are doing what we can, I'm sure that every person watching this telecast, this broadcast, will be able to make a difference themselves. And the difference that they can make may be something as simple as just helping others in need. Reza has shown the way with Operation Hope. It's an extraordinarily interesting charity for people in real need in one place. It's possible that others may have charities they'd like to support in other places. I would certainly not tell them this is the only one they must support. But if they haven't, then do reach out and help Hope. And otherwise, do what you can where you are and bring hope to those who need it. That's my appeal to everyone watching.
Thank you, Shashi. Andrea, you want to?
Yes, well, I mean, I've been really humbled in listening to what it's like to be working on the front line. Bhasha, thank you very much indeed for explaining that so eloquently. And I think you really made us all feel some of what you feel on a daily basis. I think if this crisis has highlighted anything in the UK, it has been that it's highlighted the inequality that we face here in Britain. It was said a lot at the beginning of this pandemic that it was a great leveler. But it's turned out that it isn't a leveler at all, because there are some of us who are locked down in lovely houses with gardens and plenty of food and family around them, and with children getting online educations and life going on in a reasonable way. And then there are other people who are perhaps suffering domestic abuse at home and they can't get out. They're in very small flats perhaps, and they are suffering from poor mental health, and it really can be extremely difficult. The other thing that we've seen in terms of inequality in this country is that a lot of the people who are marginalized in our society and often overlooked are the very ones that we really, really need right now. And I hope that will change, because it's shone a light on the fact that our hospital cleaners, our hospital porters, the people who stack our shelves in our supermarkets overnight and that we never see, the security guards that we pay minimum wage to, those are the people that we absolutely have been relying on, our delivery drivers who get paid virtually nothing and who are working on 0 hours contracts. And so when we look at what Hope is doing that in Kolkata. It's taking those people who have been marginalized, people maybe come from refugee backgrounds who don't have the correct papers to access school and access the what's available to them in Kolkata. And Hope has been, for the last 21 years, looking after those people. And I think if this pandemic has taught us anything, it's how much we should value everybody and how we should look, perhaps, at those people that we didn't look at very, very hard before, people who we maybe avoided their gaze in society, or we simply didn't see them because they weren't in a prominent position. And we should realize that if you nurture those people and look after them and treat them equally, they are doing an incredible job. And I think that the same can be said for a lot of those children that I've met in Hope's homes. With a little bit of love and care and nurturing, I think they're going to go on to be some wonderful people. And again, along with humanitarians like Reza, perhaps they are going to be people who can change the world. So if you can give something a little bit more, whether it is your time, or if you have any money left at the end of this economic crisis, you've got a little bit of money, I think that you can see that Hope can do amazing work for some of those who are marginalized the most in our world today.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you very much. Bhasha?
I think what you said, Shashi, and what you said, Andrea, is absolutely wonderful. I totally agree with that. I'd just like to end with saying that we always think of compassion as a selfless act, but actually it is quite a selfish act because it actually makes us feel good at the end. And if at the end of this talk you do anything, you need to act selfishly, because if you give in this situation, as I said to you earlier, that it activates our own happy centers in our brain. It's going to help us in the long run to be able to share what we have and know that we've been able to make a difference. Because all the devastation that's going on around the world, it invariably makes us feel upset, and we can't control that, what's going on around the world. What we can do is by participating, by sharing the load, by doing what we can. And even if we do this in a selfish way to get something out of it ourselves, we still achieve something out of it. So I would rather say that it's a win-win situation, whether you want to do it in a selfish way or selfless way. You get something out of it, and that is, you get happiness from giving to others.
Thank you, Bhasha. I'll leave you with the following sentiments from Mother Teresa, who dedicated her entire life, as you know, to improve the lives of the homeless and the poorest in the suburbs of Kolkata and the slums of Kolkata. And she said, at the end of life, we will not be judged by how many diplomas we have received, how much money we have made, how many great things we have done. We will be judged by, I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was naked, you gave me clothes. I was homeless and you took me in. A huge thank you to my guests today, Andrea Catherwood, Bhasha Mukherjee, and Shashi Tharoor. Today we must all be ambassadors for hope. And as Pope Francis said in his Easter Sunday sermon, which I'm sure all of you would have heard, he said, darkness and death do not have the last word, referring to the outbreak. Let us not give in to resignation. We can and must hope. Thank you all very much. Good night. Keep safe and God bless.
Please bring hope to those most in need. Kolkata needs you more than ever.